Hello and welcome back, it's Shrike here with another D&D video, and today we're going to be talking about making memorable artifacts in your D&D game. Artifacts have played massive parts in lots of stories across different types of media, from films and books to the game that we love, Dungeons and Dragons, so let's talk about how to make them memorable. Before we get onto that, just in case you haven't seen my last video, there is a giveaway going on at the moment, which only has 2 days left, where you can win the Icewind Dale Rime of the Frost Maiden book, or the dice set that comes along with it. There'll be a link down in the description to enter. It's really easy to enter, but there's not much time left, so go and enter right away. And as I said, there's going to be 2 prizes, one being the Icewind Dale Rime of the Frost Maiden book, and then the second one being the dice set that accompanies it, so there's 2 chances of you to win. And the reason I'm doing this giveaway is because I am just about to hit 500 subscribers, so a massive thank you to everyone who has helped me on this journey so far. If you haven't subscribed, please do go and press the subscribe button to help me get me to my next milestone. And on Tuesday, when Icewind Dale Rime of the Frost Maiden is released, I'm also going to be doing a live stream where I announce the winners of the competition, and we're also going to take our first look through the book and see what sort of stuff's in there. So make sure to go over to my Twitch channel and click follow so that you can see that as well. But that's enough of that, let's actually talk about what you've come here for, and that's how to make memorable artifacts. When I think about artifacts, I like to think of it in 2 different ways, one being the story and the second being the mechanics, and both do tie in together, but first up I'm going to be talking about the story of your artifact. So you can start by thinking about the mechanics and then make the story based around the mechanics if you've got a really cool idea for a mechanic that an artifact could do, but I just prefer starting with the story and then making mechanics that fit into the story of this artifact. So these are the questions that I like to answer when I start thinking about the story of pretty much anything in Dungeons and Dragons, but especially now that we're talking about artifacts. So there's who created it, why it was created, what is it, where was it created, and how was it created. And then answering the where it was created and the how it was created is also my answer to how it is destroyed most of the time. But before you start actually answering those questions, think about what an artifact is in your game. Is it always something that's world altering? Is it always going to be the focus of your story? Or are there loads of artifacts about? In my game, for example, there's not many artifacts in the world, so if an artifact comes up, it usually is the focal point of the story, at least for a short time, if not the actual main quest line. And they're usually powerful enough that they would have some sort of effect on the world if they were to come back into circulation again and maybe get into the wrong person's hands. And then once you've actually decided what an artifact is in your world and how important it is, you can also think about the competitiveness of it. If one was to come into circulation of the world again, would there be 10 groups that would be after it? Would there be hundreds of groups? Or would no one really care and everyone just get on with their day? In the previous campaign I ran, there was a white dragon's horde that the players ended up getting their hands on, and there was an artifact in there, so the players ended up having the artifact and they would walk around town with it on their back and stuff like that. So I made it that some other factions found out that they had this artifact and wanted to take it off of them, and that made a good storyline on itself. So have a think about these overarching questions about what artifacts actually mean in your world. How competitive would it be if one came back in circulation? How many are there? Just to get a broader view of using artifacts in your world before you actually start creating one. And then when you do start to create one, use all of those questions that I spoke about earlier in the video, which we're going to go through now. So if we think about who created the artifact, there could be a few important people here. There could be a king that commissioned someone to make it. So there's then the king and there's the wizard who actually had to make it. And then maybe the wizard needed some parts to it that he couldn't get, so commissioned some adventurers to go out and get some dragon scales, for example, so that they could actually make this item. There's quite a few layers in that example, and I like to think about each layer of them and just give a little bit of detail. You don't really have to flesh out the characters massively, but just understand that this is the king of X in X time period. The wizard was his right-hand man, and these adventurers were maybe not so nice. And then if the characters do somehow end up finding some information about the history of an artifact, you have that in the back of your mind, and you can just riff off that and make up other stuff along the way. So once you have the who sorted out and all the components of that, then start thinking about why. Why did they actually have that artifact made? There's loads of examples of what that could be, and now is probably quite a good time to decide if you want it to be a good artifact or a bad artifact, i.e. if it's going to be more towards evil people or more towards good people, or in the middle. So carrying on from the example of the king that had this magical item commissioned, maybe there was a hag coven that kept on terrorising his city by throwing monstrosities and evil stuff at it, so made this wizard go out and make an artifact that could deal with this hag coven. Once you've worked out why, then you think about what the artifact could actually be, which might sound a bit strange because a lot of people start with what the artifact actually is and then come up with a story with it. But I think once you've got the who and the why is a really good time to think about what the artifact could actually be. So in this example, maybe the king was once a great paladin who enjoyed using a battle axe. So it's going to be a battle axe weapon that he can wield against the hags when he actually goes after them. The next question is when it was created, and what I like to do here, rather than just giving it a year or a time period, I like to try to tie it into an event somewhat. And the reason I do that is so that if the players did end up finding information about the history of this artifact by using something like the legend lore spell, rather than giving them an exact year, you can say it was just before X event, and then it might give them a bit more intrigue into that historical event if they've never heard about that before. And the next question was where was the artifact created, but also where's the artifact now? So in my example with the king, I would have to decide which kingdom was he ruling over and where is the artifact now. Answering that question of where the artifact is now is also going to tell you where it's going to tie in with your players and with the story if you want it to, or maybe it's just something that's off in a distant land and if they just happen to go over there they'll come across it, or you can have it as a focal point in your story. And then the last question is maybe the most important, which is why I leave it to last so you've got the rest of the details to help you answer it, and that's how it was created and how it is destroyed. And why I say that is probably the most important question is because you can tie it into the mechanics of the artifact, which we'll get onto a bit later on. Using my example of the king which is going after the hag coven, the artifact is going to need some sort of spell resistance or be good against spellcasters. And as a Rakshasa, how can I say that? Rakshasa. And as a Rakshasa has some innate resistance to magic, I think that's a good way to go. So somehow the artifact is going to have to be created with some body parts of the Rakshasa. Rakshasa. Why can't I say that word? Rakshasa. And then to destroy the axe, it's going to have to be thrown into the river Styx because they are fiends after all. It probably goes without saying, but I'm just going to put it in here just in case. To destroy an artifact should be a very hard thing, not something that is very easy to do, so make sure that it's something really hard, such as going to the river Styx or having it swallowed by a purple worm or a Tarask or something like that. Right, so hopefully you have a pretty solid story as to why your artifact was created, where it came from and the history of all of that. I've been giving you my example of the king that is trying to slay the hag coven along the way, so now let's talk about the mechanics of an artifact. And what I'm not going to do in this video is teach you how to create an item from scratch because that's a whole video on its own. So if you want to see that, go and put down in the comments that you'd like to see that. But what I will talk about is what mechanics make an artifact different to a normal item, and also how I make them. So in the Dungeon Master Guides there are some example artifacts down there, and you'll notice that some of them say +1 minor detrimental effect. And then there's tables that you can go and roll on to add the detrimental effect to that artifact, which is quite a good idea if you like to roll dice to create your artifacts and to create aspects of your game, but I would rather just look through the table for the ones that you like, or the ones that fit into the item. For example, in a previous campaign I used the pretty famous artifact from Dungeons & Dragons, the Eye of Vecna, and rather than rolling the detrimental effect, I looked through the table and there's one that the player is permanently deafened, and I thought that just fits really well because the whole artifact is a actual physical eye, so making them deafened sort of makes sense. So keep that in mind if you're going to be using the ones in the Dungeon Master's Guide. But what I like to do when I create a artifact from scratch is use one of those as a basis and then just swap out abilities to keep it on the same strength level. And bear in mind that artifacts should be extremely powerful. They should be more powerful than legendary items. So make sure that the mechanics fit that. Don't just give them a +1 to their attack and damage rolls. Make sure it's at least a +3 to their attack and damage rolls. Or if it's a item that is giving spells, don't give them some just low level spells and nothing higher. Just make sure it really has some impact if the players get hold of it. You really want the effect that when they start reading what this artifact can do, they're excited or scared maybe. And then the reason I do the story first and the mechanics after is so that I can make sure that the mechanics make sense to the story of the artifact. So in the example I've been giving, the item has been made out of a Rakshasa. I can't say that bloody word. Why did I pick that? So because the item has been made out of the Rakshasa, which has innate magical resistance, I'll definitely put that in on the item as well. And interestingly, they have vulnerability to physical damage done by a magical weapon if the player doing it is aligned good. So I feel like that could be quite an interesting flaw to put into this artifact as well, because the person is supposed to be a king or someone of importance who is fighting evil. So if they do end up getting in a fight with someone good, it's probably not going to go well for them. And famously, Rakshasas also have their hands backwards. So it might be something quite fun to put in that after 30 days of being attuned to it, their hands rotate and are now backwards on their hands. Hopefully me giving you this example shows how you can tie in the story elements to the mechanical elements. And there you have it, there's all the information that I have for you to make a memorable artifact. So go away and make your artifacts. If you do, then please go over to Twitter and send them my way as well so I can have a look at them. And if you want to have any more conversations about this, make sure to put some comments down below. If you did find this video useful, please do give it a like as well, it helps me to grow the channel. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe. I do upload here on YouTube twice a week, and I am going to start streaming, so go over to my Twitch channel as well and give that a follow. I'm going to be streaming all things D&D. But until next time, happy gaming.